Welcome to video 8 in our Building Theoretical Framework series. Today's topic is about linking theory to research methods. In our journey of developing theoretical frameworks so far, we've defined what theory is and is not, explored its purpose, dissected constructs and mechanisms, and even developed our own theoretical frameworks. Now we arrive at a critical culmination, bridging the gap between theory and method. In this video, I'll explain how your theoretical framework should guide every aspect of your research design, from how you define and measure constructs to the methods you choose to the way you analyze and interpret data. Before we start, let's recall the blueprint metaphor. In research, the theoretical framework is like an architectural blueprint. It serves as the structure and the support for your study's rationale, your problem statement, your study purpose, the significance of your study, and for your research questions, methods, data analysis, and interpretation. If theory is how we make sense of a problem, methods are the tools we use to act on that understanding and build new knowledge. Used properly, a strong theoretical framework actively shapes your research design. It ensures what you do empirically aligns with why you do it. What does it mean to say theory guides method? It means your theoretical framework is the blueprint for a house. It permits the foundation to be built and dictates the plan for the entire construction. In research, your theory delineates what to build and how. It shapes your study's structure by clarifying what phenomenon are you focusing on, what aspects of that phenomenon or construct are key, how to expect those aspects to relate, under what condition or in which context. Answering those questions through theory determines how you design the study. For example, you build a theoretical framework to explain how distributed leadership influences employee empowerment. The mechanism in your theoretical framework unfolds as follows. When authority and decision-making are shared, individual employees gain repeated opportunities to exercise discretion and solve problems. Those experiences gradually build employees' task-specific self-efficacy, which is their confidence that they can competently perform and influence important aspects of their jobs. Heightened self-efficacy, in turn, leads to a fuller sense of empowerment expressed as greater perceived control, influence, and impact on the organization. So the causal chain posited by your theoretical framework is distributed leadership increases employee self-efficacy, and that strengthened self-efficacy drives the increase in employee empowerment. This theoretical pathway should dictate your methodological choices. You would need reliable measures of the extent to which leadership is distributed, perhaps a multi-source survey capturing delegated authority and collaborative decision-making routines, robust measures of employee self-efficacy, such as validated task-specific self-efficacy scales or targeted interviews, and instruments that measure the four classic dimensions of empowerment: meaning, competence, self-determination, and impact. With data on all those three constructs, a mediation model, whether estimated through a structural equation modeling or bootstrapped indirect effect test, can formally test whether self-efficacy indeed carries the influence of distributed leadership forward to empowerment. Qualitative fieldwork could enrich the analysis by illuminating how particular leadership practices cultivate self-efficacy on the ground, thereby offering fine-grained evidence for the proposed mechanism in your theoretical framework. In practice, misalignment between theory and method can derail a study. Choosing methods blindly, for example, I have a hammer, so everything looks like a nail, may lead to collecting irrelevant data or missing the important variables your theory says you need. For example, if you decide I'll do interviews because I like qualitative, but your research question is about frequency, about certain behaviors across schools, then interviews alone may not provide generalizable measure needed. A survey or observation may be necessary. Data without a guiding theory can be aimless busy work. Always remember, theory first, methods second. One of the important junctures where theory meets method is operationalization, which is the process of turning abstract theoretical constructs into concrete indicators or measures. In video 4 of this series, I discussed the importance of defining ambiguous constructs. Now we focus on measurement. The key is construct validity, the extent to which your empirical measurement truly represent the theoretical constructs in your theoretical framework. For a theoretical construct to be scientifically meaningful, it must be embedded in what we call a nomological network, essentially a web of relationships linking the constructs to other constructs and to observable indicators. In other words, you have to spell out how your abstract ideas would manifest in the real world and how it should relate to other things. Then test whether those expectations hold. Here is an example. Let's say your theoretical framework introduces a construct called psychological safety in teams, which refers to a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Your theoretical framework predicts that psychological safety leads to more knowledge sharing and better team performance. But how do we know if a team is psychologically safe? We need to operationalize it, perhaps by using a survey instrument with items that evaluate if team members feel comfortable admitting mistakes or disagreeing. That survey score is a proxy for the construct. For knowledge sharing, you count how frequently team members exchange information or ask for help, maybe through network analysis or observation logs. Performance may be measured by an outcome like project completion rate or quality ratings. Notice each theoretical construct, psychological safety, knowledge sharing, and team performance is matched to an empirical indicator or set of indicators. You would also expect certain relationships. Team with higher psychological safety scores should, according to a theoretical framework, show more frequent information exchange and higher performance metrics. If you collect the data and that pattern does not appear, then you face questions. Is the theoretical framework wrong about the relationship, or did I measure the construct poorly? This is the essence of construct validity and why the alignment between theory and method is so important. A construct with no sensible way to observe it, or no observed effects where there should be, may not be scientifically admissible until we refine it. One key point: be mindful of a tautology as you operationalize the constructs. A tautology is when a construct is defined in terms of itself, which leads to circular reasoning. For example, defining effective leadership as leadership that achieves desired effects, and then measuring it by whether those effects occurred. That's a circular reasoning. You'd be essentially saying it's effective if it is effective. This gives the illusion of linking theory and data, but in fact, you evade real measurement. A non-tautological approach would break effective leadership into specific behaviors or outcomes that can be independently observed. For example, team goal achievement and follower job satisfaction, and justified by the theory. Good theory requires clear definitions and relationships, not self-referential labels. Checking your construct definition for clarity and your measures for fidelity to those definitions is an essential practice before you even start collecting your data. The alignment of theory and method can look different depending on the type of research design. Quantitative and qualitative approach each connection to theory in different ways, but in all cases, the connection should be deliberate. Let's first talk about quantitative research design. In quantitative research, theoretical framework often takes a deductive role. You start with a theoretical framework that leads to specific hypotheses or predictions, and then you collect data, often numeric data, to test those hypotheses. The classic process is theory to hypothesis to data collection to statistical test and to inference. Here, the quantitative methods are chosen to match the theory's form of propositions. If your theory posits a causal relationship, for example, A causes Y, you ideally choose a design that supports causal inference. For example, an experiment randomly assign X observed effect on Y, or at least a longitudinal survey where you can see if changes in X precedes changes in Y. A purely cross-sectional survey can be a weak fit for a strong causal theory because it cannot firmly establish time order. If your theoretical framework is about differences between groups, for example, a hypothesis that nonprofit organizations led by collaborative leaders have higher staff retention than those led by autocratic leaders, you'd choose a comparative design, maybe a quasi-experiment, or at least include a group variable in analysis. If the theory suggests a complex web of relationships, including mediators and moderators, you may choose structural equation modeling or other multivariate technique to capture that structure. The point is, in quantitative research, you tailor your measurement instruments and data analysis to the theoretical framework. For example, your theoretical framework suggests that leader charisma increases team performance through boosting teams' collective self-efficacy. A quantitative research may generate three hypotheses. Hypothesis 1, charisma is positively related to performance. Hypothesis 2, charisma is positively correlated with teams' collective self-efficacy. And hypothesis 3, teams' collective self-efficacy mediates the relationship between charisma and performance. To test those hypotheses, you include a validated charisma rating scale or observational coding of charismatic behaviors, a team collective efficacy survey, and team performance metrics. Your data analysis could be a mediation regression or structural equation modeling. Each hypothesis ties to a specific statistic. Notably, if the theory implies temporal dynamics, for example, teams' collective efficacy builds over time, you may conduct a time-lagged study. You measure charisma first, performance later. Or even use an intervention, train leaders in charismatic behaviors in some teams but not others. So in quantitative research, theory dictates what to measure and when and what kind of a pattern to look for in your data. One thing the theoretical framework guards against in quantitative work is the dreaded fishing expedition and purely data-driven mining. Although exploratory analysis has its place, a strong theoretical framework prevents the scenario of running 100 correlations just to see what sticks. Instead, you approach data with a priori expectations, which makes any support for those expectations far more compelling. It also helps you interpret your results. An outcome like R equals 0.42. Here, R is Pearson's correlation coefficient. It measures the strength of a linear relationship between two continuous variables. It is the effect size that quantifies the magnitude of the association between two variables. So here, R equals 0.42 between leader charisma and team collective efficacy is meaningful because the theory predicted a positive link, and you also considered alternative explanations. Without theory, a correlation is just a number. With theory, it is evidence for or against a proposed explanation. Now let's move on to qualitative designs. In qualitative research, the role of a theoretical framework can be more inductive or interpretive. There are two broad ways theory comes into play. Sometimes you begin with a guiding theoretical framework that informs what you look for, but you stay open to new insights. Other times, you intentionally avoid imposing any pre-existing theory up front, as in grounded theory methodology. You let themes and theory emerge from the data and then connect it back to the literature and the theory later. Both routes still link theory and method, but the timing and emphasis are different. If you use a theoretical framework from the start, your methods will be structured to probe that theoretical framework. For example, you use the theory of organizational justice to examine how school leaders cultivate perceptions of fairness, and every stage of data collection and analysis is explicitly keyed to one of the theory's three dimensions: procedural justice, distributive justice, and interactional justice. So the logic linking theory to evidence is transparent. You begin with procedural justice, which is about how decisions are made. In interviews, you not only ask school principals whether their decision-making processes are fair, but also invite them to narrate the sequence. Who is consulted, in what order, and why? Their responses help you uncover where voice is granted or withheld. When you observe faculty and staff meetings, your attention is tuned to procedural justice. For example, you pay attention to agenda circulated in advance, explicit rationale given for the decision-making, and the moments when dissent is invited or conspicuously ignored. The documentary records, such as the school's discipline flowchart, the minutes of appeals hearings, corroborates or contradicts the interview data or observation data. In data analysis, provisional codes such as voice provided or transparency of rationale mark each fragment of data that bears on procedural justice. Notice the explicit chain: theoretical construct, interview probe, observational lens, document type, and analytic tag. Then you shift the spotlight to distributive justice, which refers to the fairness of outcomes of resource allocation. This is another dimension of organizational justice. Your interview questions pivot toward allocation. On what grounds are teaching loads or technology budgets divided? Your observation focus follows the moment of distribution itself. You observe reactions when resources are announced. You take note of the body language of those whose departments receive less. Budget spreadsheets and workload charts become textual evidence of resource patterns, as they are the data that operationalize the distributive justice. Here, the codes, such as equality rule or need-based allocation, signal which normative principle appears to justify each resource allocation. Again, every data source has been pre-positioned by the theory to speak to distributive justice. We then focus on interactional justice, which refers to the interpersonal reactions of leadership communications. Interviews probe lived experiences. For example, describe how your supervisor delivers bad news. How does that feedback feel in one-on-one meetings? In your observation, you focus on the tone, eye contact, and the timing of praise or critique. Emails and message threads provide textual snapshots of respect or disrespect in action. Analytically, labels such as respectful tone and dignity preserved capture the subtleties of interpersonal interaction. Again, in the construct of interactional justice, the interview question, the field note, the artifact, and the codes are all aligned. Why do we insist on this painstaking alignment? A conceptual framework is a system of concepts, assumptions, and beliefs that support or inform your study. Mapping each of the organizational justice dimension onto every methodological element helps you make that system transparent, and other researchers can trace step by step how a theoretical proposition of organizational justice is interrogated in the field and how the resulting evidence is collected in analysis long before you start an interpretive claim. At the same time, we treat the codes as sensitizing concepts, a term coined a sensitizing concept. They are not rigid categories into which data must be forced. Instead, they're guiding ideas that suggest directions along which to look, while leaving their exact boundaries undefined. In practice, this means using constructs such as procedural justice or distributive justice to focus your attention, like adjustable lenses, without locking the camera's aperture. If participants advance new justice logic, let's say relational transparency, you can refine or extend your coding scheme on the spot instead of shoehorning their voices into predefined boxes. Sensitizing concepts therefore preserves analytical openness while maintaining a coherent, theory-driven orientation. This approach strikes the balance between disciplined inquiry and genuine discovery. So the explicit alignment turns organizational justice theory from a decorative backdrop into an active research instrument. It tells you what interview questions to ask, what to watch, and what to observe, and what data to collect, and how to name what you find, all while leaving the door open for discoveries. On the other hand, grounded theory or other discovery-oriented research designs adopt a different sequence. Method first, theory second. When we talk about grounded theory, it's easy to get tripped up by the name. You may assume it's a specific theory like transformational leadership theory or organizational justice theory, but that's a misunderstanding. Grounded theory is not a theory. It's a method for generating theory. To be more precise, grounded theory is a systematic, qualitative research methodology designed to allow new theoretical insights to emerge directly from the data. It was first developed as a response to what researchers saw as the over-reliance on abstract grand theories that were disconnected from everyday experiences. Using grounded theory as a research method, you don't begin your study with a hypothesis or a tightly specified conceptual framework. Instead, you start with sensitizing concepts, tentative, flexible ideas that help you notice meaningful patterns without hard-coding them into your research design. They may come from your professional background, disciplinary training, or prior reading. The real work begins with data collection. As you collect the data from interviews, observations, or documents, you code the data initially line by line, looking for recurring concepts or processes. Through constant comparison, you test each new instances against those that come before and slowly build categories that explain what's going on. Those categories are then elaborated through memo writing, which is where you explore their properties, dimensions, and relationships. Here is the key point. The theory is grounded in the data. It is not borrowed from an existing theory. It is inductively built, one step at a time, from the bottom up. Now you may be wondering, if there is no theory at the beginning, what do I put in the theoretical framework or literature review section of my dissertation or paper? The answer depends on how you frame the role of literature in discovery-oriented work. You still need to justify your study, why the topic matters, what is underexplored, and what your study is likely to contribute. But your goal is not to impose an existing theory. Rather, it is to show that you are entering a space where new theorizing is warranted. And that's the key. I'll come back to this point later. In the theoretical conceptual framework section, you can discuss a few sensitizing concepts, not as firm propositions, but as flexible lenses that make you more perceptive during data collection and analysis. In the literature review, you sketch out what is already known about the phenomena and highlight gaps, contradictions, and under-theorized processes, but you do this cautiously and provisionally. After your theory has emerged from the data, you return to the literature and the theory in your discussion chapter or section. This is where you describe your emergent theory in relation to existing theories. What does it support, extend, or challenge? So again, grounded theory is a method for developing theory, a method that builds theoretical insights inductively through iterative data collection and analysis. It does not begin with a theory. You may think, if that's the case, I'll choose grounded theory to avoid learning theories and writing about theoretical framework. I understand the temptation to treat grounded theory as a way to sidestep the hard work of articulating a theoretical framework. The name itself seems to promise freedom from prior theory. But if that's what you are thinking, you misunderstand both the spirit and the rigor of the method of grounded theory. Grounded theory does not license intellectual amnesia or ignorance. It demands a theoretical sensitivity. You start with sensitizing concepts, but if you have not engaged seriously with the existing literature or theories, you will not even know whether an emerging category is new, trivial, or merely a rebranding of something long established. Moreover, grounded theory is theory hungry in its later stages. After you finish your coding, writing memos, and refine the categories through constant comparison, you must return to the existing literature and theories to position your emergent theory. What does it extend? What does it challenge? Without that dialogue, your grounded claim float in analytic limbo. It sounds interesting perhaps, but disconnected from the scholarly conversation you are training to join. Also, the methodological decisions in grounded theory, including theoretical sampling, constant comparison, and iterative memoing, are themselves driven by conceptual understanding. Deciding which participant to interview next or which case to observe presupposes at least a tentative theory worth challenging or elaborating. If you refrain from thinking theoretically, you deprive yourself of the very compass that guides the method. And remember, not every research question is suitable for grounded theory. The methods of grounded theory excels when the phenomenon is under-theorized, focuses on the process, and best uncovered through participants' lived experiences. For example, how new school principals negotiate conflicting stakeholder demands. It is far less appropriate when there are already mature, well-tested theories that explain most variance in the outcome. In those cases, a deductive design or another qualitative research design such as case study or phenomenology may provide more value. Because most organizational and leadership phenomena you are studying have already attracted some theorizing, grounded theory should be chosen only when existing explanations are demonstrably inadequate for the process you seek to understand. In other words, if you choose to use grounded theory, you owe the reader a compelling justification. What conceptual blind spots, empirical contradictions, or underspecified mechanisms in the existing literature and theories make an inductive theory-building strategy necessary? Unless you are exploring a genuinely uncharted domain, chances are some theories already address the phenomena you'd like to study. That alone does not disqualify grounded theory, but it does raise the bar for its use. Your task is to demonstrate that the existing theories leave critical questions unanswered. Perhaps they overlook the microprocesses, silence marginal voices, or fail to explain contradictory findings. Only under those conditions does an inductive, data-driven approach of grounded theory make sense. choosing grounded theory without articulating what current theories cannot explain is methodologically weak and unlikely to persuade readers. Also, a well-executed grounded theory study culminates in a new substantive theory, a mid-range explanatory theoretical model that explains the core processes, conditions, and consequences uncovered during your data analysis. Importantly, this new theory is first grounded in the data only after the core categories stabilize. Do you re-engage the broader literature and theories to show how your new theoretical model extends, refines, or challenges existing theories? Grounded theory ends in a dialogue that situates your new theory in and sometimes against the established theory. So if you choose grounded theory as a shortcut to help you avoid theoretical framing, you are choosing a microscope to avoid thinking about biology. The tool, either microscope or grounded theory, amplifies what you know and what you notice. It does not replace the disciplined curiosity that makes science possible in the first place. So whether you use grounded theory, phenomenology, or a case study, you must demonstrate your familiarity with the relevant literature, articulate your sensitizing concepts, and show how your study advances the theoretical discourse.